Welcome to another Thursdays with ThirdPath live podcast. On every episode, you will meet thought leaders, role models, and change agents connected to the ThirdPath community. And all season long, we're exploring how you can become a work care champion for yourself, your family, and your workplace. Hi, I'm Jessica DeGroot, and I'm really glad you're here today because we've got some really exciting information, some wonderful guests. And if you're excited by what you hear today, please be sure to share our podcast with someone you know. We're always trying to grow our community of champions for making change. And let me take a minute to tell you the big picture about what we're going to be looking at today and who our special guests are. All right. So one of the things we're going to be talking about is how do we make some changes at home? And I had a great conversation with a group of young professionals last month where even before having kids, they started having conversations about how they could share the mental load at home. They used Eve Rodsky's Fair Play cards to do this. And it was really heartwarming to hear this younger generation having these really great conversations early in their careers. You can always find our Thursdays with Third Path recordings on our website. There's the address to find it directly, but you'll be able to quickly find it on our website. So that's what we're looking at, how to share the mental load at home. But what's interesting, in that conversation, we touched on the fact that along comes the baby. And that's when things can really start changing. And by the way, you have children for a number of years. And so things keep on changing. And there is continuous opportunity to learn and shift how you're doing things, both at work and at home, to make things better. And so part of what we're going to be talking about today is what stage, family stage, are you in, and how that might influence the kind of ways you want to bring in this discussion of sharing the mental load at home. Most importantly, what we've learned at Third Path, and every single one of our experts today will talk about this, it's not as simple as something you can do just looking at what's happening at home, though that's what we're going to look at. It's also a little about the work you do and your maybe some of your hopes or fears around moving ahead in your career, if you set any limits around work so you have more time and energy for home. It's also a little bit about your organization and who your manager is. Are they supportive of these ideas of you having a whole life, or are they really role modeling something completely different and rewarding something completely different? And in that top right corner, it's also talking about, yes, it's sharing the mental load, but it's, we have so many hours in a day. How are we balancing both earning income and sharing the mental load? And that's where it can get interesting and we can get creative in our answers. All right, so we have some great people on today. You're going to be meeting Kate Mangino. We've had her here before. Wonderful book she wrote about equal partners. Rachel Allender, a dear long-term friend of mine who's also a therapist who does amazing work with couples around these issues. And a new friend of mine, Mike Mangino, who works with couples as well and individuals around these issues. Each one is going to be bringing a great perspective to today's conversation. So let's get going. Fabulous. Hey, everybody. I am so glad you're here today. What an important conversation we're having. 24 years into Third Path, and this is the conversation that still is so hard for people. It hasn't changed as much as I would like it to have changed. It's changing. It was really fun to hear those younger people thinking about these issues earlier in their lives. That was definitely very heartwarming. But it is still a pretty challenging topic for many couples. Let's start with some basics. Mike, we're talking about sharing the mental load or cognitive labor. Tell me a little bit about what is sharing the mental load? What is cognitive labor?
So sharing the mental load, cognitive labor, I think is a concept in families between parents, where when we're talking about everything that needs to get done or be accomplished or be carried by the parents in a family, are really thinking about almost like from the moment they wake up in the morning, the tracks that they're taking to the end of the day. And so these are the kinds of things when we're talking about how we're going to accomplish who's doing dinner, who's responsible for, taking care of food shopping, who is making sure that the plants get watered around the house, things that are on these track to-do lists throughout the day. When you think about even something like making dinner, we're talking about the cognitive labor being not just saying, do you got it or do I got it? It's really more about from the moment you wake up, then starting to think about all of the ways that you have to stretch and fold your day around making sure that that task can be accomplished. So it's not just as simple as saying, oh, I'm doing dinner tonight. It's, oh, actually, I don't have the ingredients to make the dinner tonight, so I might have to go to the store. And also, I have to make sure that I'm keeping the kids entertained to make sure that I can do the dinner and not have a tantrum spill out in the middle of dinner. Oh, and oops, the tantrum is happening. Okay, so now I have to simultaneously manage that and manage the dinner. It's really the track list of things that have to happen that we have to hold to accomplish everyday tasks between partners. And more often than not, partners are underestimating the cognitive labor, the mental load that partners have to carry throughout the day to get certain things done. So when we're wanting to work with this with couples, we really want to make sure that they are being mindful of every single step that's involved in getting these things done.
Yeah, and it even could be like, people's preferences for what kind of food they like or don't like, sometimes it's not a daily thing. Sometimes it's like, oops, it's a sick day. What are we going to do?
Hmm.
Or oops, it's a snow day. Or oops, the holidays are coming up. How are we going to handle the holidays? Or oh, summer's coming up. How are we going to handle summer? It's a pretty impressive long list of things.
Hmm.
There's some, you guys are going to hear some good advice about how to handle this very long list. Either Rachel or Kate, anything you want to add in? Nothing required. I'm going to go on with another question or thought before we go on. Great. Okay, so Rachel, one of the things that we'll be talking about today is, is there a difference between equal and equitable? And what have you learned in your work with couples around this?
Right. So this is a conversation you and I have been having for the whole time, right? For all of Third Path. I remember like the first time we had it on a street corner. Because it can look like equal means fair for everybody and that people are going to feel good and connected. And it turns out that you really have to look for what each person's strength is, what each person brings, their skill sets that they bring, and like think about what people's needs are, right? And take that into consideration, right? Equitable means that we're looking at what people need and we're making sure they get it. Equal means everybody gets the same thing. And so if it doesn't fit you, you're wearing some, you're stuck with something that doesn't fit. So that's like the short. So I think in couples work, um, with the physical labor, with the kind of physical labor of cooking or taking people to appointments or doing laundry, right? It'd be rare couple who would clock in and clock out, right? Like people take on jobs, right? But there is this feeling that often couples have when they come to me of saying, I'm doing too much and you're not doing enough. And what I try to help people recognize is you are doing too much. They might also be doing too much, right? That we're not like it's not this sort of zero sum. It's not this kind of if I'm doing too much, you're doing too little. Like we have to look at what people are able to do. Does that make sense? What I'm
Oh,
saying? I think that,
I'm gonna add on to it. I think it makes sense. It's like what you're helping them do is find, again, I like that word fair, a solution where because of the work they've done with you guys, they're both leaving feeling they've got an answer that feels fair to both of them. And it
yeah,
might turn out that there's something one partner's doing that the other wasn't aware of, or it might turn out there really is a person who needs to take up a little bit more. But you're
right.
helping them have that conversation to find that thing where both feel it's a fair solution.
Right, it's fair. And I think I will say that that dance is going to be changing all the time, right? Not just as the age of children change, but people's paid workload changes as need to take care of elders comes along, personal health. I have chronic health issues, so if my health is flaring, I might need to step back from things. Right, or we might say your paid work is going to get prioritized right now because you can't do everything right now if you're not feeling well. So there's all kinds of layers to that. And I did want to say that I think with particularly what we're talking about, which is the cognitive work, the mental work, we have to also look, and this is a tough one for couples, and this might not make me popular here. We have to look at neurologically, what are you equipped to do? And everybody's equipped to do something well. But when we start to get really angry at our partners about what they cannot do, it's like a death spiral, right? Like the one person needs it more and more, the other person can't. They fail, fail, fail. And so another piece of this is to really look at what our strengths are and what our kind of limitations are, and not to sort of say to somebody, therefore you get everything that we have to really be subtle about that, because you can't also overburden someone because they have a strength, but you can't overburden someone because they can't do it. That's
Right.
the whole story.
That's the beauty of all this, is that there really is an art to it, but once you get good at it, it's like couples get stronger and stronger, and this positive cycle can happen
amazing.
where, yeah, it's really lovely. And, I love this point about playing to their strengths. I'm going to tell a very quick story. Like, I'm very good at kind of planning and organizing. Jeff's much better at, cooking and, doing all kinds of other things. And so we felt it was a very fair solution that I was the planner, which, I know some women feel frustrated by being the planner, but I was very happy because there was a whole lot of other stuff I wasn't doing. So it felt fair. We both played to our strengths in a way that worked for our family system, So wonderful. There's lots more we want to cover. I want to get one more important item out there. Kate, I love your book for many reasons. One of the reasons is you're helping see how sharing the mental load, sharing cognitive labor is good for everybody. Tell us, how is it good for all genders that we share the mental load?
I really appreciate this question, because I think that the majority of information we see in media focuses on why sharing the mental load is better for women. And I'm going to try to not use male, female, and I'm going to try the person doing more and the person doing less, because we know that there are queer couples, there are couples who have swapped traditional gender roles. So I'll talk about why I think it's obvious why it's good for the person doing more, because it's overwhelming when you're the person doing more. And for my book, I researched couples who are both working and both contributing to household income. But, statistically speaking, widespread, one person tends to do about 2/3 or more of the work, and one person tends to do 1/3 or less. So there is this like household manager, this person who makes all the things happen. And that is an incredible weight. You never stop. It doesn't stop on vacations. It doesn't stop for holidays. It actually gets worse on holidays. That you work a full 40 hours or however many hours outside of the house, and then you come home and you have this whole other world that needs your attention, and you can't stop for one day. It is suffocating. I hear people say, I'm sure that Rachel and Mike have heard about this described in different ways from your couples, but it's wearing. It wears down on someone's emotional health. It can wear down on someone's physical health. It can cause all kinds of relationship problems. So there's obvious reasons why equity is good for that person. Equity is also really good for the person doing less, because the person doing less tends to pull away emotionally, not have such close bonds with family members. Oftentimes the person doing less at home is pushed into an income generation role or pushed into a workforce role that puts incredible pressure on them to bring home a certain amount of money. And they might feel as if they are loved or part of the family because of that money they bring home, as opposed to who they actually are as a person. So when the person doing less steps up and does more of the bathing of kids and doing homework and running errands and managing camp schedules and cognitive labor, you not only improve those household relationships, but you also get the opportunity to live your own genuine self. And you learn that your family loves you for your own genuine self, and you don't have to perform anymore for your family. And I think that is, the people I've talked to, that is probably their number one motivation.
Yeah. Wonderful. I actually really resonates with me because I think everybody, all parents aren't performing, and all parents can be more authentic. And what a great thing to role model to our children too. There are tough weeks. There are tough weeks where, the answer is going to be, pancakes for breakfast, for dinner. I mean, pancakes
Oh.
for dinner, like there's going to be and then there's going to be days that are just for celebration because everything seems to be working so well. And I think that they're seeing both parents kind of model the truth of life. And that is a very powerful thing for our children to observe. And children grow up and can become a resource in solving some of this stuff. There's lots of great stories out there about how children, as they get older, can really become contributors to making this all work. There's so much more to cover. So you hinted at this. I had two questions where we can kind of look at how this all mixes up, and either Rachel or Mike could share their thoughts about this. But one is there is a lot of assumptions. You hinted at this that this is just men and women, and when they're partner heterosexual couples that are wrestling with these issues. Rachel or Mike, what's your response that this is just a kind of heterosexual couples issue?
I was going to say, I mean, the list of it's not. So it's just not. I was thinking about two women I'm working with right now, and it looks exactly like what people imagine in a, in a
Straight couple.
Straight couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
With someone who's got a job that's a certain, it's not enormous, but it's big. They certainly participate in interacting with the kids a lot, but they're really pulled away into that job world in this like big way. And someone's really home and really stuck there in a number of ways. And what I was going to say in that couple that's really potent is I don't think that there's an experience of missing out, although I have had that couple too. The most moving thing I ever heard was when a partner turned to another partner and said, "There are 18 summers, you've missed 5." And tears came because it was like that moment of realizing, yeah. But coming back to this, I think what happens is the tension as people pull away from each other, because Kate, what you're saying about pulling away is a really big piece of it, is that what makes the list, what gets on the list is controlled by the person who's at home. And if the person who's at work minimizes that, it really starts to become problematic. And so when you have a real disagreement, particularly when you're saying our kid needs a particular kind of care or a particular kind of intervention or is functioning in a way that doesn't make sense. And the one at work says, well, I'm still with that kid, but there's this real tension and again, 2 women, 2 men, I've worked with everybody, with trans couples, you name it, and it looks the same. So Mike, you might have more to add about that. But
just a add-on thought too that I think because of the work we do too, like a lot of the way that I enter these conversations is through like identity formation and forming different identities, not even just around like sexual or gender identity, but also identity as parents or as partners. And I think it can feel so exclusionary actually when the rhetoric is really focused on man, woman, male, female, because then I will sit with a queer couple and they will say like, well, my parents who are straight and cis like are did this and this. I thought I was going to be doing X or Y. Now I'm partnered to this person. And so I don't really have a roadmap for where we're supposed to go. And it can actually be part of the formation of the couple to say like, well, we got to trash some of those older models because they don't really apply to you. But now we do have to find a model that works for you based on what's organically happening between you and your partner. I really love before what you said, Rachel, that also just like, your neurobiological hardwiring, like this is really so much about who you are in totality, not just based on one part of your identity. So I actually think some of the languaging can actually feel a little exclusionary, but if you do the work with your partner to really find where the two of you enter from, it can be really so beautiful to see how you can make your own language together around all of this stuff.
It is such an opportunity for growth in that moment. And again, you have a baby, then you have a toddler, then you have a preschooler, and then we have kids for a long time. So it's this long-term potential for growth around this identity formation that can shift and grow and be, expansive and lovely. I loved your point, Rachel, that, what's on the list, because, I think there's like some simple points that Eve makes in her book around how to kind of create the right list. And I want to share some of those. And then we're going to come back to this concept of, how does the big job and all this identity stuff influence us? So let's take a second to talk about some possible solutions and see what else you have to add to it. Because one thing I learned is, it's like you can just, I don't know how many cards Eve has, but you can decide not to put some cards on the table. This is just not important for our family. The other is to change the standards. In our household, quite frankly, clean is a very minimal standard, and so everybody in my household knows that's okay. That's how we do clean. We do clean at a minimal standard. And what I also heard in here is, that you can find the task that you kind of that speaks to you as much as possible. So Jeff definitely likes cooking. I really don't. And so you can find tasks that you like better. Something that we were touching on earlier is to own the whole task. I think that's a really powerful thing. I've said this many times on Thursday webinars. Because Jeff was the one who would do cooking, sometimes he'd ask me what I'd like for dinner. And I'd say, not to think about it. Thank you so much. Whatever you serve, I'm eating it, And I wasn't going to tell him how to do it right. And so I really feel like, figuring out how, once you've kind of taken on a task, to own the whole task. And to remember that it's you and your partner, but you can expand that circle of who's going to help you, or other ways to get it done. Groceries delivered, your children helping with cleanup after dinner, paid help for some of this stuff. There's just some other ways we can start thinking about how to get some of these tasks done. Have you guys ever come across, in talking to some couples, some tricks that you've seen couples learn around how to, or what got them to start thinking more creatively around solutions? And then we're going to talk about a couple more of the challenges. Anybody see a turning point that helped them get to a creative answer?
I have one couple, actually I have one couple where it turns out it's the exact opposite of you. He likes to do the cooking, he does the cooking, but he can't plan it. He can't plan it in a timely, effective way and get dinner on the table in a timely way. And she can, and she really is delighted to both plan it and shop for it. And then
Lovely.
And he'll do the cleanup. And so it can be it's like the same, like owning the whole task also means defining what the task is.
It's
Right.
Defining what the task is, what the standard is.
Exactly. It's like that's the actual what the conversation has to be. And I'll say beautifully, they came to session recently, and she said, he asked me to pick something up and I forgot. She doesn't forget things, and I forgot to pick it up. And he came downstairs to cook and said, "Where's the thing?" And she said, "We don't have it." And it was like gracious. He was like, "Okay, well, let's order pizza." It was like they could, because there wasn't like a blame thing. It was like she had forgotten, but it was like they knew whose task it was. If you know your partner's made a mistake, you can be gracious. If you feel like sort of guilty or like unclear about who was meant to do it, or if it's sort of contested still, it can be much harsher, right? And I was like, great.
And Rachel, it sounds like what you're describing is a shared vision. And I think that works so much better than when one person assigns the other person cards or tasks, or I'm the manager, so I'm going to tell you what to do. No one wants to be told. That's like the most unsexy thing ever from your partner, right? So I think that's a really important key, is to sit down together and have a shared vision of sort of what we both feel we're going to, and then to have shared objectives. Like you said, Jessica, what is our level here? Do we have to have a meal, or are we okay with a meal? Are we doing clean, or are we okay with clean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, Mike.
I was just gonna say, like I feel like we've like piggybacked one off the to that last point, Kate, too. I think I just have this one couple where they do this thing, and I want to brand it for everyone, where they get together every Tuesday and they call it Truth Tuesday, and it's like their huddle for the week, and it's exactly this delineation of like, is there something between us that we need to prioritize? Is there something within the home that we need to prioritize? Is there something like an event that one of the kids is having that we need to, prioritize this week? And it is so regulating for a couple to remember that they are a system that requires routine check-ins and checkups, and to make sure that you assign a time, whether it's a day of the week or every other week of the month, we have this day and check in about how all of this circuitry is kind of wired together. I just think it's so healthy for couples to do that. And every single couple I've worked with now, I'm just telling them, like, pick a day, any day, make this like the day where we have our weekly check-in.
Truth Tuesday. I love it. And, I've heard couples where the challenge was finding a time where they weren't exhausted, weren't with the kids. And one couple had the answer where they would meet at lunchtime. They'd have a lunch date, and that was their Truth Tuesday. Maybe they even had it on Tuesday. So yes, I think I joke that one of the reasons why Jeff and I are happily married is because we had a Friday night date because my in-laws, and we would talk about all this stuff, and it was regular, routine conversations that were so helpful. There might be something else one of you guys dying to say on a tip, but otherwise I want to get into another important subject. Great. So you use the word identity formation, and I think one of the other things that we forget people bring into relationships in a professional couple family in particular is some very strong assumptions around what their career should look like. And unfortunately, don't live in a world yet where all organizations are super supportive of people to live whole lives. So you have career aspirations and organizations that might not be in alignment. And that's on both sides of the couple in a two-parent family. And so, and then obviously money is also connected to careers, is also connected to the organization. And so, this can all get a little messy, trying to figure out, people's careers, given the context of where they work and how much money they're going to earn or could, risk earning. So, Rachel or Mike, how have you seen people wrestle with this issue of money, careers, family? And then we're going to talk about something really cool next, which is this concept of relational space, which brings all this together. So, Rachel or Mike, any thoughts about that?
I mean, it's interesting. I think this is what comes to mind. Mike, you might have the positive example. I'm kind of bringing the negative.
That's okay.
but it's like, I really see what we see in couples so often is a lack of nuance in the conversation about what career track. I mean, people have really good conversations about career tracking and and the steps you have to take and how far you want to go. But I see people go, well, you make more money, so you work and I'm home. And that's like the whole conversation. And that really does a disservice to what's potential, right? Because the way it worked for my partner and me is I was building up a career that now I can work a lot more and make really good money. My partner's career changed and did different things, but having a flex earlier on wasn't a problem. That didn't damage my career. And I think people do have to spend more time, because what I'm seeing is somebody, like, I've got a couple, he's home with kids and he's saying, I need time to get back in the workforce. And he's really sunk. Like it's like they didn't plan well for how he would get back in. They didn't work on that because
Yeah.
they're worried. Like, I respect worries about money, but it really is,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah. And Mike, I'm going to let you talk next, but think of it as a family system solution. Again, you're trying to help both adults move forward in their caregiving abilities and in their career abilities. And it can be done in all kinds of ways. And,
You have
just,
to talk about it, but you
yeah.
have to start by really
And
talking.
yeah, yeah. Mike, you might have something you want to add to this.
I was just gonna, I might expand on this later in like a case example, but I just to add one piece is that whether it's finances or career or something we have to keep in mind too is that again, like these are parts of an identity for a person and a family as a whole. And so like you can be the best damn employee and worker bee out there and making great money for your family. And also if it's making you and or your partner miserable, is that really nurturing your family in the best way possible? In some ways, in like a more capitalist society, we could say, sure, great, yes, like it's providing one thing, but is it providing everything? Probably not. So it really warrants like taking a hard look at it and saying, just because this is the way it looks, or this is the dollar sign attached to what you earn, what value add is this really bringing to our family if you or I both feel really under nurtured by just this one aspect of your identity or this one aspect of our identity as a family?
Yeah.
I think to that point, Rachel, yeah, like you have to be able to talk about, like, bring it to the table and really challenge it.
Yeah. And I'm going to put a blatant plug in here because we have a really cool event happening at the end of April called our Virtual Parents Forum, where you're going to learn that you don't have to choose career success or family success. In fact, the more smart you get around how you can shape work around your life goals, there really is this way to have it become growthful in both areas. So it's there's lots of opportunities, lots of solutions. We've got a great event happening at the end of April to teach you some of those things too. All right, so Kate, I want to go back to you. Together, we've been learning about this concept of relational space. When I first was explained this relational space concept, I'm like, oh my gosh, it helps me understand so much around what I've been observing for so many years. What is relational space? Why is it so important?
Well, I should have you explain this because you're the one that helped me to articulate relational space. So thank you for that. And you, let's give credit. Who is the person you often credit an author? I don't mean to push you on the spot. I can look
You
it
put
up.
me on the spot and I'm going to look it
I'm
up
so
because
sorry.
she's
We'll get
awesome and we will get you that information. And it's
We
really
can-
her, really another wonderful therapist that I know. So just
I'll
can't
look up
remember.
that name. I apologize. So, I think relational space, it helped me understand when I work with other people is that, and in my own relationship, that, there's A and there's B and they're together, but there's also C. There's this thing between them. And so, I also feel like it's with kids, like you might have two kids, but then there's this third thing, which is the relationship between those kids that you also have to look after. I think that these relational spaces are sort of these new personas or personalities or energies that come from bringing other people together, which can be wonderful and they can be complicated and they can be weighed down with history. And I think acknowledging that relational space and what you bring to it and what your partner brings to it and what maybe you should be adding to it is really helpful in thinking about your way forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so like, for example, with Jeff and I came to our partnership from a family system where careers were very important. And so as I was trying to solve my identity and our family's identity, I knew I had to really make sure career was part of that solution. Jeffrey came from a family system that was also important. Careers were important, but probably he was the guy who was more laid back and, life was also important and exploring the world and going traveling was important. And so he brought those from his family system and his identity into our common relational space. And we had to find solutions that acknowledged I had a slightly different approach to thinking about things than he did from our family systems or family of origin. And we had to kind of create this third identity that was acknowledging who I am, who he is, and how it mixes together. Here's how it also plays out. If your relational space is currently has a lot of friction, that's contributing towards that space too. Like there's a lot of arguments going on. There's a lot of frustration in that space. If on the other hand, you've turned things around and you're starting to do what Rachel and Mike have helped couples do, see the possibility, the idea that, oh, let's have pizza tonight can come out of that relational space, right? Because you're kind of working together and you're seeing the potential of other solutions. It becomes more creative as the friction decreases, the creativity increases. And so it's this really wonderful way to kind of think about the goal of creating a creative relational space and recognizing when it's a friction, there's a lot of friction in the relational space. So Mike, you, I think, told us that you had an example of this relational space concept, and we were able to look up the wonderful author, and she and her husband both came up with this idea of this relational space. They have a great book about it, Saliha Bava, B-A-V-A, and it's a wonderful book. Totally take it out. But Mike, give us an example so we can get our brains around this relational space concept.
Sure. Yeah, I love the way that this has already been framed by both you and Kate. I really how I'll pair it for couples is that I'll say it's you and me and us, or in like relational psychodynamic, where we would call it like the other or the third that exists between two people. And there's always an other. There's always an other. There's always a third. And with a couple in particular that I'm thinking about, it was a cis het couple. It was listing all the things that we already spoke about. It was a guy who worked a really great job. He was really high up in the company, had ADHD, was, neurodivergent in one particular way. A wife who was highly super functional, could do a million things around the home and just into capacities that made me shocked as a human person. And a lot of what would happen in the sessions is that they would come and they were so warm and so funny and so bright and would be listing all of these things that were happening at home that sounded horrific, like horrible, like arguments they'd get into about something so small. I tripped on the toy and I screamed at her for like 10 minutes that like she didn't clean this up before I got home. And then she would, come back and say something to the effect of like, well, I wouldn't have to clean it up. As soon as you came in the door, you would see the home and realize like I needed a hand and just like put your bag down and like chipped in. And so part of what we would talk about back and forth is how they were showing up to me, which was they could partner really together as like people, but there was this entity between them that was highly conflictual and had a lot of tenuous strain that just leaked out all over the place in their relationship. And so a lot of the work that I was trying to get them to do was to connect to this entity between the two of them, that there's something that's happening between the two of you. You as individuals are very like incredibly highly functional, but there's this third between you that is severely malnourished. It really needs attention and care. And it's the ways in which, we started to plug in these concepts of the cognitive labor, sharing the mental load. How can you become more aware that there is a third between the two of you that exists that isn't getting the help from both of you to understand the other person's perspective of what's really happening? And the more that we talked about this, the more they started to realize that like they were showing up in one way and could crack jokes and be light and be funny and be warm. And then with the flip of a switch, it could turn into something very different. And it was almost unconscious the way that they would enter into this other mindset that was really, sometimes really hard to sit with and really, really, it just made me feel so sad for them because I realized they were carrying that to work, to dropping the kids off at daycare, to trying to engage in self-care. And so that's really why it's important that we find this relational space with couples, because it really, you're not existing as separates where this isn't impacting you as people. It's coming out in every interaction, and it really frames the whole relationship in a very and depending on how healthy it is, it can frame every interaction that you're having from that point forward. And so that's why it's so important to talk and really understand like what it is that we're both carrying into each of the things that we do every day, week, month, and try to understand each other's perspectives.
What I hear in that story, the words that really grabbed me was understand the other's perspective, right? So what Saliha Baba talks about when she's kind of unpacking relational space is this idea that, you're getting curious about the other person. And you're getting curious about their whole self, so what is, in fact, there's a really wonderful article Kate's helped us craft for the parents forum. And if people put their name in the ask for Kate's article, we will email you a copy of Kate's article, because there's a series of questions that is in that article that you can ask each other to be curious, to better understand, well, what's really going on around how you feel about work, how you feel about home, what are you missing out on? There's just a nice series of questions where what you're trying to do is understand where the tension is, and learn more about where that's coming from, so that you can start then thinking about maybe some more creative ways to find answers to those places of tension. And again, couples therapy might be a great place to surface all this stuff, because sometimes people just keep on going into the old pattern of frustration, and a therapist can help you unpack that better. There's more we could say about relational space, but to me, it was really helpful to start, you get to know each other, and this is going to be something you have for the entirety of your relationship. So I think it's a really powerful concept. Anything anybody wanted to add about relational space before we go on to the next question?
I mean, I think when people want, like they want to be able to be in that place in a way that is curious about their partner and empathetic to their partners. And then when people really do need when couples therapy really is important is when you can't feel that it's not when you say you're not feeling it, but when pointing, but when you go inside, I'm not able to feel this for you. I can't, like, something's blocking that. And I feel like often what's blocking that is this real fear that no one's going to be curious about you, no one's going to be open to what you need. Even though you sort of like you can't make that step for your partner because you don't feel like you're going to get that back. And that can go back to your whole family, your family of origin experience of curiosity or empathy, or it can be repetitive misattunements in the relationship that you're in or in a previous relationship. But because that's what I said, the death spiral. It's not that people hang on to each other and hang on to their relationship, but they get stuck in this like constant fight. And so if you can open to your own curiosity about your partner and offer that to them, I think that really sets up the possibility of them being curious about you and opening up to that, right? Like it can, and that sets a virtuous cycle. That's a cycle that also feeds itself.
Actually, you're helping me think about it almost like on a spectrum. And so as you're listening in today, if you're at that point in the spectrum over here where it feels like empathy is possible and curiosity is possible, there really are some great questions you can ask each other to learn about it. And I have a really good story that will help illustrate that. If you're on the other end of the spectrum where it feels like, there's just been so many misalignments, so many frustrating conversations that the empathy is lost, getting somebody else involved helps you be able to step out of those triggering patterns that repeat that anger and frustration. And that's where couples therapy can be really helpful. And by the way, Jeff and I had struggles around how to do parenting. It wasn't around sharing the mental load at home. It was around how do we actually parent. And so we had a therapist that we would go to because we both had different opinions about how to do it. And that came from probably our earliest experiences. And that couples therapist helped us come up with some common directions around how to parent in a way that was complementary to each other, because we had gotten stuck in some ways that were not so complementary. Here's a really simple example of relational space. I've had her on our Thursdays with ThirdPath webinars before. Kristen Mashka, This Is Not How I Thought It Would Be, wrote a wonderful book about kind of her early experience when they both became parents, and the aha moment she had when she realized she was frustrated with how absent her husband had been up till that point in time. And when she saw how sad he was when he first had finally some real time with his child, and the tears came into his eyes because he was so sad around how he'd missed out on so much, she could finally realize, oh, the job's the problem here, not him. And they could then join together and get creative around how to address that job as the problem. So wonderful. Hey, there's many more directions we could go in. Soon I'm going to be opening it up to get people's a chance to ask them questions. Is there one that really speaks to us right now? We could talk a little bit about how this might change as children get older. We could talk a little bit about how maybe for people early in their professional careers, how to think about these things. We could talk about, you know, well, is there a topic that's kind of, you're feeling like we should jump into right now that would be useful for helping people when they're thinking about sharing the mental load? That's something that you've really kind of learned working with couples that we haven't wrestled so far. I think we've covered most of the most important things.
I just saying it again. Mike, did you have one?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, I was gonna say, going back to that piece about sort of becoming generous with each other and open, it's like when I start to work with someone on what's getting in the way of it, I'll know we're kind of making some real progress when their partner will offer something constructive and say, well, wait a minute, isn't that true in your family? Like they're kind of starting to put like the puzzle pieces come together. Like we understand what's causing the block, what's causing the kind of difficulty, the empathy. And so again, I think there's this like if you're starting out, you really have to believe that if your intentions are good, that your partners also are too. And unless it's like all the data that you collect that it's not the case is usually pretty off. Like it's like they're grappling with something, like they're stuck. I was with a couple today. This is actually a simple example. And he said, I need to talk today about the fact that I'm asking her for time to start working on finding a job. And she's not offering me that time. And she looked really stricken and she said, well, I did say we had a whole conversation and I said there was this time that I could leave work by and maybe I'm not leaving well, but I had planned it. And he said, well, you aren't always, he said, but I don't like seeing you unhappy, like you look unhappy. And I said, I'm a little suspicious. And so what came out of the conversation was, one, she was offering him time that wasn't useful. It was too late in the day and he couldn't get the things done he needed to do. He needed the time right after lunch, 2 to 4, so he could actually reach out to people at a time when they'd be reachable. Two, she like he hadn't really asked her. Like it became clear that he was asking her at the last minute when she had already planned. But if he hadn't said, could you do it tomorrow, in which case she would have been like, absolutely, I'll clear my schedule, I'll make it work, right? Like his ask was coming at a time that she couldn't do. So his implication that she wasn't willing to be asked really hurt her. But when we untangled it, she could say, oh, like they could both say, oh, right? Like if you ask me, you got to give me enough time. And if you're offering, you got to give me something I can use, right?
Yeah.
And then underneath that, just one layer down was his fear of like imposing any more burdens on the family of her needing to make more room for him when he doesn't know how long it'll take him to get a job and fear of failure. So you've got all these layers that you're playing with. And if you can take time with your partner to find out what's cooking underneath, like take the elevator down a few floors, you're going to have a lot more success than if you stay up here. I asked
Yeah.
you did. Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh my God, you're making me think of something. Mike, hold on to that story. The last tip I have before we hear Mike's story and then break is it reminds me, Rachel, of that thing that Jeff and I do where we take 5 minutes each. It's like what we're doing is going down the elevator. In other words, we're here, we're kind of stuck on this conversation. And so what Jeff and I will do, we'll literally put on a timer and say our perspective for 5 minutes. And then the other person has 5 minutes to talk about their perspective. And then because you've heard both of them, you take another 5 minutes and now it's slightly different. Oh, okay. Maybe you're not as bad as I thought you were. And I'm going to tell you my perspective now. And then the other person says theirs, and slowly we're going down the elevator to a much more nuanced understanding of, instead of you're the problem, where the real problem is and how to creatively start addressing the problem. So swapping 5 minutes with a timer, I like it because I know I only have to listen for 5 minutes and then I can say my opinion. I can get down to the real thinking about what's going on. Interesting. I like that. Mike, a last thought before you open it up to people for this town hall discussion.
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking of, and Rachel said it so well. Before, what we were talking about, this kind of space where even checking in with yourself to know if you have the capacity to really not only understand it from your partner's perspective, but for yourself to feel the feelings, to like
Yes.
really get into that conversation. I use this, this is from like my work back in the day, working with a lot of like trauma and trauma survivors, is compassion fatigue, like just like not being able to drum up the compassion or the empathy for your partner, and to feel it within yourself. That's really the most important part. And I guess the one thing I just wanted to add is, we know that when we're burnt out and we are fatigued in these conversations that just continue to kind of pick at the things that are really already partially frustrating or hard for us to talk about, that sometimes we're going to say or do things that don't really push the conversation to a productive or even just like emotionally healthy place to go. And so I really remind couples when I'm sitting with them that like the rules of engagement, the rules of like fighting fair are so applicable to also making sure that we're appropriately trying to carry the mental load together, because this is all negotiating as well. It's not just trying to see what feels most important to you. It's also having to make sacrifices and having to compromise and having to understand on a level that you might not understand yet, but have to work to get to understand why something really weighs on your partner in the way that it does. But you're not going to be able to organically move from that place if you're not feeling how in some way, shape, or form this feels for your partner. You don't have to exactly feel it the way that they do, but you have to be able to understand on some cognitive level why this is laborious for your partner, why it's hard, or if it does press on like a generational, or upbringing nerve that really activates something for your partner. And if we can't do that, then yes, right. Like, is that more of a needing to do more skills-based work between the two of you, reading more materials and getting more education? Do you need to do couples therapy? I think that spectrum is pretty wide. But it does feel so important that people are able to get curious with themselves about their own ability to really hear their partner. And if they can't really hear it and it just feels like static on the TV, like white and black, just like in the background, you're probably not going to be able to move effectively from there. And so the whole point is that we just want to really be able to get curious about ourselves and our partners to make the best choices for both of us moving forward.
Well said. Really well said. Thank you. So I'm going to just show you where we're going next with the idea that we have a real opportunity here for you guys. So let me just show you a couple of things. We've been hearing from some pretty amazing people. What we're going to do now is we have some time for you guys to ask some questions. We're going to encourage you to turn on your videos. This part will not be recorded. But it really is a chance for, in our town hall discussions, to make use of these experts and ask them some things. Maybe a question is, what's the first step I can take? Or, how do I start a curious, compassionate, courageous conversation? And maybe we need to explain relational space better. Where we're going to is, this idea that, we think that if you can kind of get clear as a couple around what your goals are, this shared vision that Kate talked about, then you can really combat some of those external challenges that still exist today. That job that's not really supportive of you living the life you want or whatever. Okay, for those of you who are listening in today, we just had a great conversation. Oh my goodness, what a treat to be able to ask such smart people live and in person the questions you have. And what really surfaces is that there's moments in time when families have kind of a juncture, a big change that needs to be addressed. And it might mean like a whole new set of cards have been added to trying to solve things, maybe a divorced family, maybe a family with special needs. And so you have to kind of rethink, how do we handle this new juncture? What are the new responsibilities we're trying to solve? Does it mean reshuffling the way we used to do things in the past to accommodate this new juncture? But as one of the wonderful therapists reminded us, that's life. These changes happen. And the more we understand we're not static, we're going to be shifting and changing, the more we can keep on making things happen in a smart way for all of us. In fact, the person I was so smart about reminding us that things keep on changing is Ryan McMillian. And I'm going to ask him a really heavy lift right now. I've asked Ryan to listen in today. He's another great therapist who's been working with couples around these issues, and to help us summarize some of what we've been learning. So Ryan, I really thank you for listening in, for having the wisdom you've already shared. What do you think are some of the most important things we've taken from this discussion about sharing the mental load and how we can help couples around this issue? Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I think first and foremost, just having the language of cognitive labor is really important because it gives couples a way to really conceptualize what one of them is talking about when they're talking about carrying the mental load. And so when you have this language, something that you can point to is really, really helpful. But there was something that was shared as we talked about it, which was that I may be doing too much, and it doesn't mean that my partner is doing too little. And that often comes up in couples therapy, is that when one person is doing a lot, there becomes this like almost competition between the two of them about who's doing more and who's doing less, how you need to pick up the slack. And what happens as a result is we begin to minimize what the other person is doing, and they get defensive. And so whatever it is that you want to communicate in that moment gets lost because of that level of defensiveness. They don't now hear the need coming across, they hear that I'm not enough. Another thing that comes up around this idea of cognitive labor is I often talk to couples about like urgency levels. It's not so much that you weren't going to do it, it's that your partner keeps beating you to doing it, right? Is that they do it before you do it. They pick it up before you're going to pick it up because there's a different urgency level that you have. And so when there are some different urgency levels, it can bring about this feeling. There are feelings that we have around cognitive labor that my partner is not as present, that my partner doesn't see me as important. And certainly if I have to tell you about what we need to do, given that it happens every single day, then that doesn't make me feel seen. You know, if I have to give you all the instructions and walk you through step by step, then I might as well do it myself. And a lot of couples will share that in couples therapy. So I think what was helpful about our discussion today is when it was pointed out, I believe by Kate, how is this helpful to both? How is it helpful to both to kind of recognize, this idea of cognitive labor and to really kind of flesh it out in a way that could be helpful, not just to the person who is quote over functioning or doing a lot, but to the person who seemingly is doing a little. And I think playing to your strengths was one thing that we talked about that was helpful. And I just wanted to add, when we talk about playing to your strengths, that sometimes it may mean that it's something that you do really well and your partner does really well. And you may be giving up that particular task so that you're not doing too much, right? And so that might be helpful. Or your partner may do it at an 8 or a 9, and you may do it at a 10, right? And that may be a thing too, but that 8 may be, as you both talked about, it may be the standard. That may be a good enough standard. And you all asked such a great question that I never thought of, but what is the minimal standard for this task or that task or for cooking in our relationship? What is the minimal standard? I think I read that one person mentioned that a snack plate is the minimal standard in our family. And that's okay. But there has to be this shared vision that we were talking about throughout. In my family, we have a relationship vision board. And what we do is we discuss, forecast, what we want during that year, what we want for our children, what we want for our family. We include our children in that conversation in terms of what they may want, some of their goals and aspirations. And then we check in month to month. We then set smaller goals to accomplish it. And we talk to each other throughout so that we're on the same page, about our vision, so that the vision for that year, we are on the same page regarding that. And so in my practice, sometimes we use something called a daily temperature reading. And the daily temperature reading has 5 parts. One is that you have some appreciations, because I find with the cognitive labor conversation that some people mention to me, it's not that I necessarily need my partner to do more. I just need them to acknowledge and or appreciate what I am doing and not feel like it's just taken for granted. So even if it was just acknowledged, hey, I appreciate that. I thank you for this. And some people ask the question, do I have to thank you for doing the bare minimum, they may say, or do I have to thank you for doing things you're supposed to do? And my response to that is, it feels great to be appreciated for doing the things you're supposed to do in a relationship. It feels great to be seen. It feels great to be recognized, even if it is something that you consider the bare minimum or a basic task. Yes, that would feel wonderful. And so we move from there to talking about career. And as we were talking about career, we were talking about how our careers may impact our ability to be present and how we make decisions regarding our career. Sometimes it's the person who makes or earns the most in terms of income. And that may not always be what's overall best mental health wise for the couple. And therefore, what we realized is that, maybe more nuanced conversations around career and how you can navigate those things. I believe Rachel talked about the beginning of her career journey and how they were able to navigate some different things in the beginning of that process to make sure that maybe one person wasn't giving up their career, but they were doing it in a way that worked with the other person's career. As we talk about cognitive labor, and hopefully I'm not speaking too quickly, there was just so much richness to the conversation, is that I recognize that some people are constantly not thinking about what they need to do at home, but thinking about work. And it's so hard for them to be present because they're constantly thinking about work. And I thought about that when Rachel and others were sharing, is that when your mind is constantly on work or solving work issues, it's hard for you to be present and mindful at home. And it's important then to move into this conversation about relational space. How do we then navigate all that we're carrying between us in these moments? And there were a number of things that were helpful besides having a shared vision. One of the things that was mentioned is a speaker listener exercise for about 5 minutes. One person speaks, the other person listens, and you just listen during that time frame for 5 minutes, and then you switch. Right? And you don't necessarily need to comment on everything that the other person said. You may just be saying what's coming up for you. But the good news is you're going to get a turn. A lot of couples will say, I feel like I'm going to forget what I need to say and I won't get my opportunity. And they're going to say something that I don't agree with and so forth and so on. But you are going to get your turn. And it's not so much about going toe to toe or point for point as much as it is gaining understanding, which was the key phrase that came from the speaker listener exercise. In addition to speaker listener, we use an exercise, or I use an exercise called On Becoming with couples, where you kind of become the other person. They share a story, and as you become that person and speak in the first person, you gain a level of empathy. You may not agree, but at least you understand. And so those were some of the key points that came up throughout our time today around cognitive labor and what we can do to overcome some of the hurdles that come with carrying the load.
Yeah. And Ryan, it's no surprise to me that you captured all these points so well, because one of the things I've really seen is finding a couples counselor who's practicing these ideas, who's an involved and engaged dad, who is, understands about creating a, relationship vision board for their families. You are living this and you are bringing this to the work you're doing. And that is so true of Rachel and Mike as well. That, look for a therapist. If you need help with these issues, look for a therapist who has this vision of couples really being able to work together, think differently about work, think differently about roles at home, and finding solutions that feel fair and joyful potentially for everybody involved. Wow, thank you, Ryan. That was super helpful. I'm going to put up some wrap-up slides. We're going to say some last words. This has been a really, truly insightful and helpful discussion. Okay, so you've heard that we have this pretty amazing event coming up where at the end of April, we have, all of these people that you heard today are participating and helping us plan for this event, part of our community of experts. We've got some really cool workshops around, including one about sharing the mental load, how to kind of redesign work so you have more time for life, lots of great stuff. So make sure to sign up for this event that's happening at the end of April, our virtual parents forum. And as you can see, we really are trying to be a resource to you. So stay involved, continue the conversation with us, join our Trailblazers Facebook group, come again next month for our next Thursdays with ThirdPath event, follow us on social media. And remember, we are a nonprofit, and that, for us to really succeed in our mission and find those change agents and visionaries helping make change in the world, your donation makes a difference. All right, we've covered a lot of ground, ladies. Thank you so much. This was really powerful, lots of good information. What's one last word of advice that you would have? Maybe I'll start with you, Rachel. What's one last word of advice that you would have?
As I was listening to Ryan, what came into my mind was community, right? Not only like therapists, not only your partner, but that this is not something you do by yourself, and that having places where you can vent, places where you can get ideas, places where you feel safe enough to share with other parents, other people going through this is really useful.
Yeah. Yeah. You've been my community in so many ways around this. Thank you, Rachel.
Mine.
Kate, any other last words of wisdom?
I'm going to be true to my own research, and I'm going to wrap this up with a gender lens and just say, remember that sometimes when we fall into roles and patterns, it's because of the way we are socialized as kids, the way we were brought up, and the expectations other people had for us. And so I think in communication with your partner and your community, reflecting on, was I raised to be an earner? Was I raised to be a caregiver? Was I raised to be a provider? And is that what I want, right? And I think that if we have that moment of self-reflection, we can decide, maybe that was what I was raised to be, but this is what I want to be now. And it just takes a little bit of intentionality between the two of you to separate gender expectations with your own family's expectations.
Wow. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate this conversation. Very good. Thanks for your wisdom.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye.